Hello everybody, welcome to Melbourne. We'd be hoping that we're going to be welcoming you with some good news here, but unfortunately that is not the case. Waking up today to the news that the Australian Grand Prix has been cancelled. Breaking the story last night was Craig Slater. We'll talk to him very shortly. Martin Brundle and Jenson Bunton alongside me. Let me just start though by reading out the statement, a joint statement it was, from Formula One, the FIA and the Australian Grand Prix Corporation about the cancellation of the event. Following the confirmation that a member of the McLaren racing team has tested positive for COVID-19 and the team's decision to withdraw from the Australian Grand Prix, Formula One and the FIA convened a meeting of the other 9 team principals on Thursday evening. Those discussions concluded with a majority view of the teams that the race should not go ahead. Formula One and the FIA, with the full support of the Australian Grand Prix Corporation, have therefore taken the decision that all Formula One activity is cancelled. We appreciate this is a very disappointing news for the thousands of fans due to attend the race, and all ticket holders will receive a full refund, and a further announcement will be communicated in due course. All parties took into consideration the huge efforts of the Australian Grand Prix Corporation, Motorsport Australia, staff and volunteers to stage the opening round of the 2020 FIA Formula One World Championship. However, concluded that the safety of all members of the Formula One family and the wider community, as well as the fairness of the competition, take priority. As I mentioned, Craig Slater broke the news late last night. It was about 3 o'clock when the decision came through. What was the timeline to that, Craig?
Well, just to illustrate how fluid this situation's been, you've read out the final statement which cancelled the event. That came out at 12 minutes past 10 Australian time, 12 minutes past 11 UK time. Barely an hour earlier on live television, the Australian government said that the event could still go ahead as long as no spectators were there. But of course, it had long gone by that point. Let's go back to 20 minutes past 10 on Thursday evening here. That's when McLaren announced that this member of their team had tested positive and they had pulled out of the event. We were just sitting down to dinner after a day at the track. I went back to the track. I spoke to maybe 15 to 20 members of different teams who were leaving the circuit at that point off camera. All of them thought that the event would be cancelled at that point. Andrew Westacott, the CEO of the circuit, eventually left the track at around about 1:15. At that point, he still believed that the event could continue. But there was this meeting going on, as you say, in town with all the team principals, with Ross Brawn from Formula One's commercial rights holder, as well as representatives of the FIA. 10 teams represented. As I finally learned, a 7-3 majority were in favour of not racing. However, one team principal came out at 10-2 and told me he felt it was right to race, and that is what he believed would happen. So in concert with the news that was coming from the track, we felt comfortable at that point to report that perhaps things were going ahead. But pretty quickly, within about 20 minutes, 2 very senior sources within Formula One told me that this was not going to happen, that they were going to dig their heels in, and that as far as they were concerned, it would be inappropriate to race. And then this morning we had Mercedes' letter to Formula One saying that they felt it inappropriate. They were appealing to the sports bosses to cancel this event. And pretty quickly after that, of course, we had confirmation.
Yes, we were just making our way to the circuit, got us about as far as the bridge to go over the pontoon, and the crowds were queuing outside. I suppose it was inevitable, wasn't it, Martin? As soon as one person in the paddock, it's a small place, got it, this was going to happen.
Absolutely. As soon as we heard that somebody was positive and been diagnosed with the virus, it was clear to me that no responsible company, team, whoever's involved in Formula One could send their personnel into the paddock, and it seemed clear to me that the event just absolutely could not take place.
Jenson?
Yeah, it's a massive shame for the sport. You know, I think everyone involved in Formula One and the fans really love this race. It's a really special race, first race of the season. But I think you've really got to feel for the fans as well, especially the people that were here. They were waiting at the gates this morning. They didn't know that the weekend wasn't going to go ahead and that they wouldn't be allowed in the paddock. But, you know, we all need to take a step back and realize that this is a sport. We love it very much, but it is a sport. It's a type of entertainment, and the health of thousands of individuals is a lot more important than that.
Could this decision have been taken earlier?
Well, if I could jump in there, I think we have to appreciate the complexity of an event of this scale. I've mentioned the role the government played in all of this, and I think if we were to defend Formula One's leadership, we have to say that they had to wait on what the government and what the local health authorities here were going to say in terms of what would be appropriate to carry on. And so it was only after all of that information came in that they were able to take a decision based on everything. And I think that's what dragged out that process in the end.
There's bound to be a procedure, a protocol in terms of, is it the government? Is it the commercial, the promoter? Is it the FIA? Is it Formula One itself or the teams? What is the hierarchy of who makes these decisions? I jumped on the plane thinking, I'm not sure this event's going to go ahead, but I feel we were right to come out here and try to make it happen. I don't feel we've done anything wrong in terms of, somehow the world's got to keep turning in this dreadful position we find ourselves in, like some kind of horror movie. But so I have no regrets coming out and assuming and trying and hoping that we put a show on.
Yeah. A lot of money at stake, and cynics might consider that might have been the reason for a delay in any sort of decision. But in the end, the right decision has been taken. Yeah,
definitely. And I think, when you look at a lot of other sports around the world, NBA, for example, it's not such an infrastructure like Formula One. This is a massive circus that's traveling around the world. Most of the teams have traveled from Europe to Australia, and to put a stop to the race, it's very difficult for the governing body, and they've finally made the right decision. I'm sure some people would rather it was earlier, but it's a difficult decision to make.
Absolutely. Okay, so the paddock gates are locked. Outside them, though, for us is Ted Kravitz.
Well, it's quite the most extraordinary scene after quite the most extraordinary couple of days here in Melbourne. The sign over the paddock says "Welcome to Melbourne," and the whole of Formula One has been very welcome to Melbourne. They packed up all the cars and all the equipment from Europe and flew over here expecting to have a Grand Prix. But then after the events of yesterday, when a McLaren team member was positively tested for the coronavirus, really it left the organisers and the other teams no alternative. For the safety and well-being and health of their own teams and of the travelling public, they had to urge the Grand Prix organisation and FIA and the Formula One group to cancel or postpone the event, and that is what has happened. So what we have now, the scene is what would normally be after a Grand Prix on Sunday. It's a pack-up time. So we're leaving them all to it. We're outside the paddock. All the team members you can see are now leaving. They're packing up their desks. All the freight is being packed up. Where it goes to next, nobody quite knows. Does it go to Bahrain as it was intended to on the air freight? The stuff that was going from here for the next race, nobody knows. Where does the sea freight goes? Again, nobody knows. So we'll have to see what happens with all of that. And so everything is being packed up. All the team members are getting their stuff. I haven't seen any drivers at the circuit yet at all. We understand, the rumour is, and I've had this confirmed by a fellow Formula One driver, that Sebastian Vettel and Kimi Räikkönen decided about 2 o'clock in Melbourne time in the morning that they would get the Emirates flight in Australian time on Friday morning to go to Dubai and then onwards back to home. But we haven't seen any Formula One drivers turn up for that. But all the teams are here and they're all packing up. I did speak to Bradley Lord, who's the head of communications at Mercedes, and asked why they felt it was important to put out the statement before the Grand Prix was officially cancelled by the Australian Grand Prix Corporation. And he said that it was a decision made by Toto Wolff. Mercedes wanted to put out a communication. They sent a letter to the FIA and to Formula One saying that they didn't feel that Mercedes, the world champions, could continue to participate in the event, and they urged Formula One and the FIA and the Australian Grand Prix Corporation to cancel the event. They can't agree, didn't want to participate, can't agree that this event should take part. That letter was sent. Only a few minutes later, the Australian Grand Prix Corporation, the FIA and Formula One did agree indeed to cancel the entire event as well. Asked him about Lewis Hamilton as well, and he confirmed that Lewis Hamilton was speaking as himself. He was free to express his opinion, and he didn't come under any pressure or censure from the team for expressing his commitment and his desire to see this race postponed, and that's following Lewis Hamilton's words yesterday. But yeah, everyone's packing up. As for what happens next, we'll see. Does Bahrain go ahead? At the moment, nobody knows. We're just preparing here. You can see all of the media is ready for a press address that's going to be made by F1's CEO and Chairman Chase Carey, and we'll bring you all the news on that here and on Sky Sports News, and of course all the latest on skysports.com/F1. But that's the latest from a very bizarre Formula One paddock.
Yeah, thank you to Ted. So as far as we understand it, at the very earliest, the decision is going to be taken on Bahrain by this evening. I mean, it's effectively a McLaren home race, if you like, with what's going on there. I think, how can it go ahead with the way things are going with one of the team members having contracted it?
Well, we don't want to speculate. I mean, it's on until it's off. At the moment, it's on behind closed doors. Let's see what Chase Carey has to say at this news conference today. Just picking up on some of the things that Ted was mentioning, particularly the powerful voice of Toto Wolff and Lewis Hamilton in all of this. Remember how powerfully Hamilton spoke on this issue and what sway that may or may not have had with F1's decision makers. Well, I have been told that they did take on board the commercial rights holder and the FIA what Lewis said, and given his position in the world of motorsport, that did have a bearing on their ultimate decision. I think when voices like Hamilton and Wolff speak out to that extent, I think it is hard for the governing body necessarily to oppose them. So I think if the major players in the F1 paddock are against racing in Bahrain, as you say, it's very hard to see it happening.
Okay, I'll come back to you, Martin, but on the subject of Lewis Hamilton, this is what he had to say yesterday, and Sebastian Vettel's thoughts too.
I felt okay traveling out here. Naturally being on a flight with God knows how many people, and then stopping in an airport full of so many people. I didn't really think too hard on it. I was just trying to make sure that I was taking all the precautions I could in terms of not touching things, and always using hand sanitizer. I am really very, very surprised that we're here. I think motorsport is great that we have races, but for me it's shocking that we're all sitting in this room. So many fans here already today, and it seems like the rest of the world is reacting probably a little bit late, but already this morning you're seeing with Trump shutting down the borders from Europe to the States, you're seeing the NBA has been suspended, yet Formula One continues to go on, and I don't know. I saw Jackie Stewart this morning, looking fit and healthy and well in the lift, and some people, as I walked into the paddock, some elderly individuals. So, it's a concern, I think, for the people here. It's quite a big circus that's come here, so it's definitely concerning for me.
I think it's very difficult, to have a fair judgment, but of course, you realize that a lot of sport competitions, big events get postponed and cancelled, and yeah, like Lewis said, it's fair to ask yourself the question why you're here. Obviously, we have to trust, the FIA and FOM to take precaution as much as they can. But I think the answer that nobody can give you at the moment is how much you can control what's going on. So, as a matter of fact, we are here. So, I think you just try to take care as much as you can.
So as we were saying, Sebastian Vettel took the first flight out of here, as did Kimi Räikkönen. Just a tweet from Lewis a little bit earlier. Sadly, this is the right decision. No one wants this. We all want to get into our cars and get racing, but we have to be realistic, and we must put health and safety first. The reality is this is really serious, with people dying every day, lots of people ill, and even if they're not ill, many people being affected financially and emotionally. No one really knows the extent of what we're dealing with, but we should all take precautions to keep as many people as safe as possible. I know it's disappointing as sport unites us when times are tough, but it's the right call. Listen to the advice, everyone. Keep safe. Hope to be back racing soon, but in the meantime, look after yourselves. So some strong views, perhaps the right views from Lewis Hamilton too, in this time of crisis. We're going to take a short break. When we come back, we're going to hear from some of the key figures in and around Formula One, including Chase Carey. That's in a couple of moments' time.
maybe we should say that.
Welcome back. If you're just joining us, you'll find the news is that the Australian Grand Prix, the first of 2020, has been cancelled. A decision made earlier by the FIA and the Australian Grand Prix Corporation. Reaction all the time. Zach Brown has tweeted, I applaud the decision by F1, the FIA and the AGPC to cancel the Australian Grand Prix. The health and safety of the F1 family and local community must come first. As a racer, this was the most difficult decision I've had to take. As a CEO, it was the easiest decision to take. Right, let's get some more views here from the CEO of the Australian Grand Prix Corporation, Andrew Westacott.
Well, good morning. Welcome, everybody, ladies and gentlemen. My name's Andrew Westacott, Chief Executive of the Australian Grand Prix Corporation. With me, a person well known to everybody, is Mr. Chase Carey, CEO and Chairman of Formula One. On my right, Mr. Paul Little, AO, Chairman of the Australian Grand Prix Corporation, and Michael Massey, the FIA Formula One Race Director. Before I get started, could I make a comment and suggest and say to everyone that following the testing positive of COVID-19 virus for one of the McLaren Racing Team personnel, our thoughts from the Australian Grand Prix Corporation, Formula One and the FIA are with that individual for a very, very speedy recovery. The format of this morning will be some individual comments, and then we're all happy to address direct queries in our particular areas of expertise. So could I please hand over the microphone now? I have pleasure in introducing Mr. Paul Little, Chairman of the Australian Grand Prix Corporation. Paul.
Thank you, Andrew. And I just want to say that events over the last few days have been moving incredibly quickly, and the Australian Grand Prix Corporation has been obviously reacting and responding to those issues. To our race fans, I'd like to say we're terribly disappointed that the event can't go ahead. The reasons for that are well known, and I'm sure there'll be questions about that shortly. But from the Australian Grand Prix point of view, just want to say sorry to our fans, and the health and safety and welfare of the teams and people, the community generally has to take precedence, and it will and has. And we look forward to hopefully being able to run this event at some later stage. We'll just have to wait and see.
Thank you. I guess first and foremost, I want to add our thoughts with the individuals that have been infected by this. Also want to express our disappointment on behalf of the fans. This is a race we always look forward to. Great fans here. We're sorry not to have it. But it's been a very fluid situation. I think we've made the right decisions. We've worked well with our partners. I think we're all disappointed to not have it, but these are challenging times, and I think we've made the decisions we have to make. So we're happy to answer questions here.
Could I make one additional comment? The fluidity referred to by Chase Carey and Paul Little, the Victorian government is the partner, if not the sponsor, of the Australian Grand Prix Corporation. And as an entity of the Victorian government, we have worked extremely closely with the Department of Health and Human Services to take advice throughout the many weeks leading up to this event in relation to the spread of the COVID-19 virus. Melbourne and Victoria has a Chief Health Officer that feeds into a national body of Chief Health Officers who feed into a committee and all the way up to the National Security Committee chaired by the Prime Minister. We have taken guidance every step of the way from that committee, and their input has been crucial. And this morning, we had that additional advice this morning that indicated that the event would be cancelled, and that information has been had in parallel. It's important to note that Victoria on Sunday last weekend, 5 days ago, hosted a massive event, the World T20 Women's Final at the MCG, which hosted 86,000. So this is a fluid situation that emerges and changes on a day-to-day basis. And I say thank you very much to Formula One, the FIA, and the Department of Health and Human Services and the Chief Health Officer for the work that they've done in making sure that we've got up-to-date information all the way through. We're happy to address any questions, and we'll pass the microphone to the direct individual who can address that question.
Thank you. This is Daniel Paez from Colombian Radio. Is it fair to say that the Victorian taxpayers are going to pick up the bill for this cancellation?
Well, a cancellation of this nature has a lot of consequences, and some of those are contractual and financial. We will work those through with the commercial rights holder in the days and weeks following this announcement, and we will be making sure that appropriate contractual measures are looked after in that manner. So there's going to be a lot of things. The point I would make to the fans as well is that we are going to work through with the fans on the refunds applicable to their ticketing arrangements. As Paul Little, our chairman, said earlier on, we will be, we're reaching out, and we're saddened for the fans, we're saddened for the staff. And let me say on behalf of the Australian Grand Prix Corporation, this event could not happen if it wasn't for the ecosystem that exists in Victoria. So not only is it the fans, but there's an element of sadness and disappointment that I have for the 600 suppliers, the 12,000 staff that work the event on the weekend, the 180 staff that we have, the family that is Formula One. Sport is a wonderful thing that brings us all together, but also in these changing times around the world, we need to be very mindful of the input of the health authorities, and the health authorities in concert with the FIA and Formula One and the Grand Prix Corporation has reached this decision.
Question for Chase. Olaf Mollier, Ziggo Sports. Hello, Chase. There are some rumors around that the season might start as late as Baku. Can you shed any light on the forthcoming races that we are officially still awaiting? Or
at this point, our focus really is dealing with the issues this weekend. Clearly, I just came in from Vietnam, so we are in discussion with partners on the upcoming races. But I think at this point, what we really want to do is make sure we deal with the issues here, deal with them properly. But in the coming days, clearly we will be addressing the events yet to come. It's a pretty difficult situation to really predict. I mean, everybody uses the word fluid. It is obviously a fluid situation. The situation today is different than it was 2 days ago, which is different than it was 4 days ago. So trying to look out and make those sorts of predictions when it's changing this quick, is challenging.
Ted Kravitz from Sky Sports. A quick question to Andrew first, and then to Chase. Obviously, some drivers have been asking sort of open questions about whether this might have been foreseen. Obviously, you said the situation was very fluid. Was it just that one event, that one positive result for the McLaren team member that really tipped the balance? And maybe you can tell us also, Chase, what the discussions were last night between the teams. Were some teams wanting to go ahead? Whose ultimate decision was it, despite the teams maybe wanting to go ahead or some not wanting to do it, that you had to cancel, or was that just something that had to be done?
Ted, thank you. The science behind the epidemiology of this virus is being monitored very, very closely by the Chief Health Officer, the Department of Health and Human Services of the Victorian Government, and the National Network of Chief Health Officers. They're looking at what's happening in Australia. They're looking at what's happening globally. They're looking at the spread of this from a pandemic point of view, and they've taken all these inputs. Clearly, they act on the information they have. I have no doubt that the inputs of what was happening at the circuit is one of many, many inputs, along with the inputs and considerations of what's happening with the virus in Melbourne, Australia, and globally. So I'm sure they took it into account, but they had a broader set of considerations as well. And the Australian Grand Prix Corporation took advice from the Chief Health Officer this morning, pretty much at the same time as we were finalising matters with Formula One and the FIA.
Yeah, and I guess, I think there were an accumulation of facts that led to the decision. Certainly, the infection for the McLaren individual was one. But really, the situation has continued to change rapidly. Again, as I said before, you go back and look 4 days ago, and you had very different situations around the world, whether in Europe or the U.S. Or various events. And so it is an evolving situation. All those facts are part of what we deal with. There obviously were other individuals being tested here, so clearly the situation here was very different than it was on Sunday, as Andrew said, when you had an event with close to 100,000 people, here on the ground. And you do have to realize we're a sport traveling around the world that really started to move everything here last weekend. So there is a lead time to what we do In hindsight, it obviously looks different, but when things were changing as rapidly as they were, I think we were dealing with it, in real time. In terms of the decision, we spent the last evening really getting input from everybody. It was a joint decision, the FIA, our Australian partners, ourselves, certainly input from the teams. As would be expected, there are a range of views. We're dealing with things real time with in a very difficult, challenging situation. So I think, were there differing views and differing opinions? Yes, and I think that's what everybody tried to wrestle, through. But I think we got to the right place, and I think we all agree we got to the right, made the right decision.
So there we go, the views of some of the integral figures within Formula One. Chase Carey, of course, has winged his way over. He's been over in Hanoi trying to sort out what happens with the Vietnamese Grand Prix. Right now, what we're hearing is that it's going to be delayed and postponed to later in the year. But as everyone keeps saying, it's the fluidity of this situation and the uncertainty at the moment that reigns, and safety, of course, of everybody involved is paramount. Before we go off air, though, I just want to dwell or reflect potentially on the financial implications for some of the smaller teams here, because there's going to be holes in the budget. You just look at the stock markets right now. Is there a risk that a couple could go under?
Yeah, I've seen various reports in financial papers suggesting the coronavirus could cost Formula One in the region of £60 million in the short term. Teams are paid from the central pot, a proportion of the monies gained in each Grand Prix. So the more races are lost, the more money they lose. If teams don't go to races, obviously they can avoid the costs in terms of travelling, maybe attrition to cars, that kind of thing. But a race like this, where they've all turned up, is a lose-lose situation, really, because they're paid to come here and they're not going to get the money for the race. And the likes of Williams, for example, get around half their money from these race hosting fees, or the money from the central pot.
I can't see us starting this season until May or June at the earliest. I can't see any way we can race next weekend in Bahrain. Who's going to sanction that, given that we've already had people in the paddock, one person in the paddock with the virus? So, we're just going to have to find a way for the teams to tread water. It pales into insignificance, doesn't it, compared to, not losing lives in this equation. And like us all, we just have to find a way around it and bide our time. The problem for Formula One is it's a circus of at least 3,000 people. A lot of stuff's on the sea freight, isn't it, going around the world. The pit equipment, for example, there's 5 sets of that winging its way around the world on ships. And you don't just suddenly rock up with the Formula One circuit and say, well, we'll run the Australian Grand Prix, later in the year. The logistics of that, the cost of it, and the thought of, say, some championships can do a double header in a weekend and make up the races that way. But that doesn't work for Formula One, because who's going to pay a double sanction fee for a weekend? They're only going to get one crowd. So we're in a really tight situation here financially, to answer your point.
And I'm right in saying, aren't I, that it's got to be a unanimous decision by the teams if they are going to rearrange an event. For example, China, something like that. Everyone's got to be in agreement that they've all got to go there.
Absolutely, but you don't just take the Formula One circus and plonk it in China or Vietnam easily.
I guess the purpose-built circuits is a little bit easier, like Shanghai, whereas here, you're on public roads.
Yeah,
it's a lot more difficult, and Hanoi also.
Yeah, Formula E, of course, delaying the season. I think we've seen what's happening with the Premier League, and potentially that's going on behind closed doors. I suppose, we don't want to speculate because we just do not know what's going to happen with this. You're saying mid-season, but for now, information will be fed, presumably on Sky Sports News. We'll be able to do that for the rest of the day.
We'll keep up to date with things as best we can. I mean, an amazingly fluid situation this week. Chase Carey, who was talking there, was actually involved in this meeting via text and email from his plane as he flew over here. That's how difficult it has been to bring all the various parties together to get some kind of realisation on this. Unfortunately, we've had the bad news today.
Absolutely. Gentlemen, thank you very much. Unfortunately, that is all the information we can provide from Melbourne right now. The news that the Australian Grand Prix has been cancelled. As to when we see you, we do not know from now. But if you want to keep abreast of the situation, as Craig was saying there, follow it on the app or on Sky Sports News for all the very latest on this outbreak. Stay safe. Thanks very much. We'll see you again, we hope, very soon.
Sky Sports F1. Feel it all.